Hey, this is Joel Duff. Welcome back to my channel. I was going to mention this article on my This Week in Creationism episode, but the more I thought about this article, I thought it deserved a little special attention. It needs a few more words than I would have space for in my This Week in Creation episode. Now, not that this article is long. This is only 300 words or so, and I might read the whole thing here and comment on it. But the thing I want to note first is sometimes I just read creationist articles and I leave myself scratching my head and I think, why don't they think of obvious questions? Right? They're working so hard to explain some natural phenomenon and they're trying to squeeze it into, okay, now how do we explain this within this 6,000 to 10,000 year old framework? How do we explain these complex behaviors? I think the author immediately looks at something like woodpeckers snacking on bones, a complex behavior like only pregnant ones or breeding woodpeckers do this. That's such a complex phenomena that could only have been created by God instantaneously at the beginning as a behavior that he created in these particular birds. Okay, fine. But did you stop to think to yourself about the implications of the conclusion you jumped to? And I'm often left thinking, I don't think they have. I don't think they've really thought through these questions. And I often wonder, an intelligent person that comes and reads these articles, who actually asks questions and is inquisitive, is not going to be satisfied by these simple articles. And if you dig deeper, they don't have more complex explanations. It's not like, okay, you can learn more here. This is sort of like, oh, we're giving you the answer to this question. Think no more about it, right? Don't let yourself be upset by the complexity of these ecological interactions and behaviors. Yeah, Joel, what are you talking about? Well, I guess we need to talk about this article so I can give you some sense of why I'm concerned about this. Why breeding woodpeckers snack on bones? When you eat eggs, boiled, poached, or omelets or otherwise, do you discard the eggshells? Likewise, if you eat trout or turkey, do you recycle your fish or fowl bones? Well, of course, the answer for most of us is no. Those are disposable parts. We're not going to eat those later. But some birds and mammals eat broken eggshells and snail shells to get nutritional, valuable calcium. So that's the reason why they do that, right? There is a valuable resource in eggshells and bones. It's calcium. And calcium is necessary for our diet. Now, of course, we get enough calcium, hopefully, in our diet from eating other things, so we don't need to eat these other items. But other organisms in the environment who are calcium deprived are going to find these to be valuable resources. Birds such as woodpeckers and sandpipers also munch on bones for this fundamental mineral, especially during breeding season. Getting calcium carbonate, is essential, of course, but how do these animals know they need it, especially during the breeding season? Now that's the catch here, all right? These birds don't normally munch on bones, all right, or pick up eggshells and swallow them. They only do this during breeding season, when their body needs the extra calcium because the female is going to be producing an egg herself and is going to need calcium carbonate in order to produce that egg, and so needs a higher input of that. And the question that lingers in, I think any inquisitive person should actually ask themselves this question. How do they know? How do the birds know? Right? They're eating all these other foods, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I got to start eating some bones because I need some calcium because I'm going to be making eggs pretty soon. Right? How do they do that? One of my answers, just from a biological sense, is that there's hormones that are triggered, right? Hormones that are turned on that are involved in the process of beginning the breeding cycle, right? And in the breeding cycle, it's not just that, the hormones trigger the bird to be like sexually active, right? Seeking a mate. It's also hormones to the rest of their body triggering it to have different kinds of physiological responses. And one of those is triggering a need or an uptake of calcium and then storing that away for the production of eggs. Right? And so they're then going to look for resources in the environment that have that extra calcium. Now, you can push the can down the road again, right? You can ask the next question. Well, then, okay, great. So they know that they need, it's a change in their hormone levels. It's a biological change in their physiology that then causes them to recognize they need more calcium. But how do they know bones have more calcium? Right? How have they learned that over time? Where did they get that behavior, that knowledge from? All right, I'm not going to try to answer that question just yet. Let me get through what the logic in this particular article is. A related question is, how do expected human mothers who suddenly crave seafood, pickles, or whatever know they need nutritional change when their physiological transformed wombs busily build babies? I mean, partially answers his own question there. His physiologically transformed wombs, right? A woman who is pregnant or about to get pregnant, again, has a change in hormonal concentrations, which then trigger a number of different responses in the body, just like estrogen and testosterone create a number of different physiological changes in the human body. And so that is then triggering a response that indicates to the body, I need more of different types of nutrients, gives an enhanced desire to eat, because you're going to need more food, specifically more nutrients for making the baby. Actually, calcium nutrition satisfying behavior makes sense biblically. Okay, so that's what he's calling this, calcium nutrition satisfying behavior, right? So it is a behavior in that during this portion of its life, this bird's life, it's not seeking out that calcium. It's getting enough calcium in the other things that it's eating to subsist. But then at this particular physiological change in their life, they need more calcium, and so they're seeking out that calcium. So that is a calcium nutrition satisfying behavior, they're calling it. And he's claiming this makes sense biblically because it helps Christ's creatures to reproduce successfully. I mean, it's a design argument saying that God made in these creatures an additional, he gave them the ability they're going to reproduce, right? They need to reproduce. God commanded all the organisms to reproduce and fill the world. And to reproduce, you need a higher amount of calcium at that portion of life. And so therefore, God built into organisms the knowledge, the behavior of calcium seeking, all right? Calcium satisfying behaviors. So to be fruitful and multiply, they can fill Earth's habitats. Thus, learning how creatures fulfill this Genesis mandate helps us to cast down haughty imaginations. All right? So I'm sure the author of 2 Corinthians, I'm sure thought that these haughty imaginations of evolutionists is what they had in mind. So we know, because God made the animals, that this is why they're searching out calcium. We don't need any other explanation. Such as the imagination of Darwinists who tried to replace Christ with animistic, nature-creating itself mythology masquerading falsely as science. How about that for a mouthful? Right? Darwinists are animistic, nature-creating itself mythology. Nature creating itself, that natural selection. Remember, Institute for Creation Research very much rejects the idea even of natural selection as a force for adapting organisms. And we would consider seeking calcium, all right, as a maternal behavior or a breeding behavior to be an adaptation, right? It's an adaptation of organisms, giving them better fitness, right? So natural selection should select for, or the environment should select in these birds behaviors that lead to the uptake of calcium at that particular stage in their development. But in this case, it's nature creating itself mythology, masquerading falsely as science. That's not science. A natural selection adaptation, right, is not science in their mind. Christ commanded birds to reproduce and fill environments. He also equipped them with what they need to do that. right? So he said in the original creation mandate, fill the world. How are they going to fill the world? Well, he gave them all the skills and capacities to do so. All right. We're now learning many of the intricate details. So every time scientists learn something about how they do this, how do they go about finding bones and extracting calcium from it, we're describing how God equipped these organisms for doing that. Successful reproduction requires a harmony of physical traits, biochemically regulated by genetics and epigenetics. Okay, now we're getting to the point. This is the reason why I wanted to talk about this article. There's been nothing special about it so far. The usual stuff, right? Biochemically regulated genetics and epigenetics. That's the physical traits. So reproduction requires a bunch of physical traits that are controlled by genetics, they admit, and epigenetic phenomena. And, now get this, and decision-based behaviors. Decision-based behaviors. So we have behaviors and it's decisions birds are making. I'm deciding now that I'm going to eat bones to get calcium. And other times I've decided I'm not going to do that. And these are decision-based behaviors that rely upon learning by the non-physical soul of a bird. The non-physical soul of a bird. This balanced blend, This balanced blend of physical body systems with non-physical learned actions is one of the wonders without number that we can admire God for as we reverently study his creatures, how his creatures live. So they're suggesting there is this blend of physical body systems, the actual physical creation, right? Genetics that then make the physical body, combined with non-physical learned actions. Non-physical learned actions. All right, so these birds have, in quotes, soul, because they don't mean soul like human beings have a soul. Non-physical learned actions. I'm really having trouble imagining exactly what that is. So what they're trying to say is that there's no way to explain in the physical being of that bird how it would decide that it needs to eat calcium at that particular time and date, right, under these particular conditions. That there is a non-physical component to that. There's like this soul, there's like, we'll just call it consciousness, all right? As if the consciousness were disconnected from any kind of physical, there's any physical nature to that. And so the birds just know, right? They've been gifted with knowledge and they know that those bones have calcium in it and they need it when they're breeding. And then when they're done breeding, they just know that they don't need those bones anymore. They don't need to eat those bones anymore. And so they stop eating them and they go back to their regular diet. And that doesn't have anything to do with their brains, all right? Their actual neurons, that's not stored there. This is a non-physical learned action. You know, the word learned here too is kind of complex, right? Were they taught that? Does this author mean these birds were taught by their parents? Like, see this is what you do at this particular time. And that those learned behaviors are non-physically stored. I look at it, bird looks at it and just knows it and learns it, but it's not stored anywhere in like their neurons. It's not a brain thing. It's not a chemistry thing, right? It's not a physical thing. They just know it, right? I mean, the things you learn, do you think if I learn how to play the piano, is that capacity not somehow physical? It's a non-genetic, right? So decision-based behaviors, they rely upon learning by the non-physical soul of the bird. Non-physical soul of the bird, and they rely upon learning. So the birds have learned this. Well, how did they learn it? I mean, that's actually our original question. How did the birds learn that those bones have calcium in them? And then remember they have calcium in them in a non-physical way. You see, are you as confused as I am? Because this is really hard to understand what exactly is going on here. What do they think is actually happening? When creatures purposely search local habitats for needed nutrients, including vital minerals like calcium, they exhibit continuous environmental tracking. Yes, our very popular continuous environmental tracking as a alternative to natural selection to explain how organisms adapt to the environment, as they hunt and select what they need from their territory. Thus, Christ equipped animals to actively select what they need from their environment, their habitats. It's not true that habitats select or shape passive animals. Okay, continuous environmental tracking is super confusing to understand, like at a physical level, because now apparently it's not exactly just the physical level. Maybe that's why it's so hard to explain and understand. They exhibit continuous environmental tracking. So they hunt and select. They're out there looking for things that they need. Somehow they know they need calcium. And so they look at their environment and they actively select what they need from their habitats. Sorry, how do they know that the bone has calcium in it? So they're actively looking. They're like, okay, that has calcium in it. I need that. So I'm going to actively think about the fact I need that particular bone right now. I'm going to select it. And this is somehow stored and learned in a non-physical way. So this isn't part of their brain and learning, and there's not part of their genetics. Totally. This is absolutely, totally confusing. By the way, the author is not a biologist, all right? Has a theology degree. And is trying to talk about biology, and it obviously is super confused and confusing me. Maybe some of you can explain what's going on here. What am I missing? What am I missing here? So what can we learn from Christ's red coccidated woodpeckers? These remarkable creatures recycle calcium from collected bone fragments, consuming bone flakes just before and while they lay eggs. Right? Females took bone fragments from raptor pellets located on the ground. Small bone fragments were consumed by the pellets, where larger pieces were taken to a tree trunk by flight, where they were pecked and manipulated. Pieces of bone were cached, that means stored, by placing them between scales and the tree bark, and then hammering them with the bill until they were wedged. They confirmed that these bones were cached by recovering 2 pieces of bone from trees and by observing birds recover cached bones, handle them, and cache them elsewhere. The birds remembered where they put the bones. Oh, how did they do that? Is that also a non-physical thing? They don't have a map in their brain of the environment and have stored memories of where they were. They sort of learn this in a non-physical way. Selecting and ingesting bone-pecked calcium is targeted and purposeful. Well, yes, they are doing it purposefully. They are targeting those bones. It's not random. I agree. It's not random. They aren't randomly picking up just anything and then pecking on it and eating it. Right? They're not picking up pebbles and swallowing them. They're not pecking on grass and then eating the grass and hoping that it has calcium in it. No, they're going for what they know has calcium in it. I agree. They know that it has calcium. Because mother woodpeckers seek and extract calcium from bone fragments during breeding seasons, hiding pieces for later snacks, and then mostly ignore the pieces when they cease producing eggs. That's really amazing. Yeah, it is amazing. It's really cool. One of billions of of the intricacies, billions of facts of the intricacies of nature. All right, I'm racking my brain to try to understand continuous environmental tracking because it's still very confusing to me. But that's not the thing that really hit me about this. That's not the simple, basic problem that James Johnson just I don't know, why hasn't he thought of this? Do you know why I'm making a big deal? Do you know why I'm stressing? Do you know why I am stressing that God made this as their created behavior? Let's think about the birds. Let's think about their creation. For young earth creationists, when were birds created? They're created on day 5. They were given the mandate, be fruitful and multiply. They can fill the earth. This author is saying that they were given the capacity to fill the earth, and one of the things they needed to do is be able to reproduce, make eggs. When they have to make eggs, they need extra calcium. How are they going to get extra calcium? This particular woodpecker gets bones, and it knows that bones have extra calcium in them, and that's its source. What I want to know is, where did the bones come from that they used? Where did they find bones in the original creation? Aren't bones the result of organisms that have died? Isn't that a resource that God has given them that is something that is dead? I don't think woodpeckers are going around pecking on living animals and getting into their bone marrow, sucking it out. So they have to wait till there's bones lying around on the ground, which they then have been given the capacity in this non-physical way to know that that bone right there has calcium in it. And that's my design, is to find those bones. And when I'm ready to breed, I need to eat those bones to get the requisite minerals for me to be successful. But how are they going to be successful in the original creation when there was no death? There was no death. Animals didn't die. Ken Ham's telling us all the time. Animals could not die. There were no bones in the original environment. I mean, I guess he could hypothesize that God created millions and billions of bones that didn't actually belong to formerly living things and just placed them on the ground because he knew that he had also created woodpeckers that were created with this image in their mind, of this knowledge in their mind that they have to eat bones at this particular time in their breeding cycle. And so he provided them with those bones. Right? Is this another example of God preconceiving of or having foreknowledge that Adam was going to sin, bring death into the world, and so he created in the woodpeckers a system, a knowledge of how to find calcium in an object that wasn't going to exist, but he knew it would exist in the near future, so they would make it to that time when there would be bones for them to be able to survive. See, I think this is where young earth creationists, they don't think through what they're saying, right? They don't think about, they talk all the time about the original creation. They talk all the time about how the perfectness of the original creation, right? It was all very good, no death, everything was wonderful, everything designed exactly right. Those were perfect organisms. Well, those perfect organisms, according to this author, part of their perfection is designed to eat the product of death. So here's what it looks like to me. They're designed to rely on death. They need death in order to provide them the materials that they need to make more life. Right? They're recyclers. Right? So this is an attractive example for their audience to say, like, this is really complex. How could it happen through natural selection mechanisms? How could God have created this in any other way other than to just simply place in organisms this knowledge? That object has calcium in it. That other one doesn't. So that's the object you should pick up. That's the object you should store in that tree for a rainy day when you're going to need it, because you're going to need that calcium. And there isn't any other mechanism that God created in this world that could result in them learning that behavior. And by learning, I now mean adapting that behavior for them to be more successful into the future. Yeah, I don't know where else to go with this. I guess I'm probably beating a dead horse here. I probably could have said this much more simply. I'm just sort of taking you through my thinking when I read an article like this. For myself, I'm not offended by the idea that the God is the author of amazing features, in organisms. But it's not necessary that God had instilled in a woodpecker this particular knowledge, and that's the only way that knowledge could have come about. And this whole thing of it being the soul, the non-physical soul of a bird, is where this information, this is how they know these things. Talk about mystical. I mean, didn't he turn around just a few minutes later and talk, what was the phrase there? What are Darwinists do? They're replacing Christ with animistic, nature-created self-mythology, masquerading falsely as science. I don't know, this whole non-physical soul of a bird storing like the knowledge of birds and how their behaviors, because this isn't a physical body system. This is a non-physical learned action. And that information is somehow stored in the non-physical body soul of the bird. Right? I don't know, that's pretty peculiar. But all of continuous environmental tracking is kind of peculiar this way. I can't believe anyone's still here. Anyone still here? No one's still here, right? You were all left long ago. When I look at the stats for this, it's going to be like they watched 2 minutes and then they were gone. So I can pretty much say whatever I want right now because I know no one's listening, right? What crazy thing could I say right now to like test whether you actually made it this far? I need to like throw out some bizarro fact about Joel Duff that if one of you mentions in the future, I'll be like, I can't believe it. You watched the breeding woodpecker snack on bones, video. Okay, I'll say this. That's not weird, but it is something I've never talked about. And very few people in the world would know this. I've given several talks. I've given several talks on creation and evolution in Guatemala, at a seminary in Guatemala, translated into Spanish, all right? Yeah, that was a very interesting experience. Really profoundly affected me. Got to see a lot of, we got to see a lot of different slices of life, let's just put it that way, in Guatemala. And it's the only part of Central America I've ever been to. And I have very vivid memories of my 5 days in Guatemala. All right, how about that? Yeah, so mention Guatemala to me and I'll be like super impressed. I'll be like, I can't believe you are still watching this video at that time. All right, that's it. I'm out of here. All one of you left, hit like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.